Good morning.
Okay. You say that every day.
So we finished the Mishnah on 71a that spoke about exactly which crops can you harvest before the Omer, which ones can't you? So Tanya, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yamin Omer, Kasav Echad Omer, Uktzartim Esek Tzira, Veveisim Es Omer. You can go and harvest your harvest and bring the Omer. That's one verse. Ksiv Reishis Ketzirchem Ela Kohen. The first of your harvest goes to the Kohen. So which one is it? Does the first of your harvest go to the Omer? Or does the first of your harvest go to the Kohen? So says the Gemara, how can you reconcile these two verses? So says the Gemara, Mimakum Sha'ata Mevi Iyata Kotzer. From the place that you're going to bring your Omer, so that you can't harvest. Mimakum She'iyata Mevi, from the place that you're not going to bring your Omer, so then Ata Kotzer. So the first answer is that it depends if you're dealing with crop that's going to be brought for the Omer. Like our Mishnah said, the field that needs irrigation, those crops aren't so good. So from there you could harvest. But if you're going to be harvesting crop that is viable to be brought as an Omer offering, so then that you cannot harvest for yourself. Yeah. So okay. So says the Gemara, the Ema, maybe another suggestion that could answer these two psukim. Maybe only barley, the species that you're going to bring, the type of grain you're going to bring as the Omer offering, that's the one that you can't harvest for yourself. But the other ones you could. The other 4 grains you could. Says the Gemara, well, that can't be. Ahula Matzamers, why? Because Rabbi Yochanan learned that from challah, from the application of challah, that applies to all 5 grains. So to the obligation of the harvesting before the bringing of the Omer, that requirement, that obligation to not harvest things for yourself applies to all 5 grains as well. At the end of the day, the verse teaches us, which is really a source for our Mishnah, that the crop that can be brought as an Omer, that you cannot harvest. The crop that cannot be brought as the Omer, that one you could harvest. Yeah. So that verse that said, Sartim as a ksira, the Hevesim as Omer, that one implied that you could do harvesting before the Omer. The other verse that says, Reishis Ketzirchem, so it sounds like that the very first harvest has to be the one that's going to be brought as the Omer. So that was the contradiction. And the reconciliation is, it depends if you're dealing with a crop that could be brought as the Omer or that cannot be brought as the Omer. Okay, now, our Mishnah said that the people of Yericho, the Anshe Yericho, what would they do? They would harvest Biratzon Chachamim, and the sages, that would be fine. It was in line with what the sages said. However, they would pile up their harvest, and piling it up was not in line with what the sages said. So now we're going to talk about this Anshe Yericho for a second, or for a long second. Yeah. So Man Shamisled Amar Michu V'Lo Michu. What does this mean? It says that they piled up their harvest. It was not in line with the sages, but the sages didn't protest. That was the Mishnah. So what's this in between where you don't like it, but you're not protesting? So Man Shamislei, the Amar Michu V'Lo Michu, Rabbi Yehuda. Who's the opinion that says that we're going to find that you could have something that's not in line and there is no protest? But says the Gemara, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So now the problem is that once you established the Mishnah as Rabbi Yehuda regarding the piling of your crop, the problem is, what was the first part of the statement? Was that they harvested and that was in line with the sages. So, but now that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to run into some trouble because of the Savra Rabbi Yehuda Kitzira the Anshe Richa Bratzon Chamave. Can you really say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the crop that they were harvesting was in line with what the sages wanted? Is that really true? So the Hatanya, we have another brisa that says as follows: Shisha Dvarim Asu Anshe Yericho. 6 things the men of Yericho did. Shlosha, 3 of them, B'ratzon Chachamim. The Chachamim agreed to it. The Shlosha, Shelo B'ratzon Chachamim, and 3 of them, the sages, the Chachamim did not agree to. Which ones did they? Which did they not? Let's see. The Elu Sheb'ratzon Chachamim, and here these are the things that they agreed to. They would be Markivin Dekalim Kol Hayom. They would spend their days grafting the palm branches. On the 14th of Nisan. Now, there's a whole chapter in Pesachim that talks about can you or can you not do work on the 14th of Nisan, especially after Chatzos. So one could have thought that maybe grafting the palm trees is a form of work, and therefore should be prohibited, and therefore the sages should not agree to. That would say no, they didn't consider this to be that act of work that is prohibited. Okay. So that is that. That's one thing that they did that was in line. That was fine. The Korchenes Shema, they would say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem, and then they would go right into the Hafta. They wouldn't take it. They wouldn't pause in between. They would wrap up the Shema. So that's also something which maybe one should have thought you should have paused to not put the words together, and maybe they would think is not a good idea. That was also in line with what the rabbis wanted. Okay. Yeah. They would say Shema without pausing. They would not pause between the word. Yeah. So, okay. So that was 2. And 3 is the Kotzrin Lifnei HaOmer B'Ratzon Chachamim. And they would harvest the Omer, and that they would harvest, before the Omer was brought, and that was also in line with the sages. So sounds like why were they doing it? There was a financial need. They had nothing to eat. There's no crops. They're going to lose their money. So maybe just the harvest itself, that was fine. Right, they didn't necessarily eat it. They're just harvesting it. They didn't go sell it in the marketplace and get it ready for the day after the Omer, like we saw earlier. So they just harvested it. Fine. That was all in line. Now, what were the things that were not in line? The Elu Shelo B'Ratzon Chachamim, the following are not in line with the Chachamim. Gochim Lefnei Omer, to pile up the crop before the Omer. That was one thing. Let's see more about it. Umatirin Gemizios Shel Hektish Shel Charuv V'Shel Shikma. So there's a whole. They would there was these carob and sycamore trees that were sanctified, and then they grew branches. So now they would take the branches and they would cut them off, and the Chachamim felt that you're using things that belong to the Beis Hamikdash. The tree was sanctified, and you're cutting off the branches for yourself. So that was something that was not in line with what the rabbis wanted. Also, uports and pritos began saying, ubepardo saying, lahachil nesher la'aniyim b'shani b'tzoros b'shabbatos u'yom tovim divrei Rav Meir. The last thing was that they would make these holes in their fences and in their orchards to allow the poor people to come to eat from the fallen fruit. When it was, a time of famine. The problem was, though, that we don't really like people taking fruit that fell off a tree because you might come to go onto the tree and pick the fruit. So that was another thing that was not in line. Okay, but that's all Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir aligns well with our Mishnah that the harvesting was fine and the piling was not fine. But we just established that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. So let's see what Rabbi Yehuda says. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said to Rav Meir, Im b'ratzon chachamim hein osin. So then you call Adam osin kain. If it's fine to do the harvest before the Omer, so why did you pick on the Anshe Yericho? Every person could do it. So to that, he's going to reject and give another explanation. which is then going to come in conflict with our establishing our Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda. Ella elu ve'elu shelo b'ratzon chachamim. Really, all 6 things the Chachamim didn't like. 3 of them they protested. 3 of them they didn't protest. Elu ve'elu shelo b'ratzon chachamim. V'al shlosha michu b'yadam. V'al shlosha lo michu b'yadam. 3 of them they protested, and 3 of them they did not protest. The elu shelo michu, the following they did not protest. B'yadam. Markivin dekalim kol yom v'korkan shema v'kotim v'goshen l'fnei omer. So they would graft these trees at Pesach. They would not pause in Shema, and they would harvest and pile up their crop before the Omer was brought. So those are the things that they did not protest. The elu shemichu biyadam. The following next page that they did protest was matirin gmizio shel hektish shel charav shel shikama. This idea that they would go and allow the branches of the sycamore and the carob trees that were sanctified to the base of Mikdash should be cut down, that they protested. Reports and appearances began to say, part of saying, that idea that they would make holes in their fence and their orchards to let the poor people come and take the fruit on Shabbos and Yontif, and they're worried you might climb the tree and eat it, that they did protest. V'nosnin peya liyarik. They would pay if you have to leave off the corner of your field, so they would leave off, sounds like some of the vegetables, and that's not included in peya. They thought that was enough. If I leave off my vegetables, I'm good to go, and that wasn't true. That's what vegetables are not included in peya. So that was umichu biyadam. So that was Rabbi Yehuda's rebuttal to Rav Meir and his explanation. Now, Gemara asks, according to your reasoning, why were there 6 things? You really counted 7 because you ended up saying that they harvest and pile the produce. That's 2 things. So that's the piling is an extra one. That's 7, not 6. What are you going to say? Remove this idea that they harvested before the Omer from the list. Once you remove that idea that they harvested the Omer, that they harvested it from the list, so now, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda could fit with the Mishnah because the fact that they harvested was removed from the list, so it was not something which they disagreed on. Rather, so therefore that would fit. The piling up of the grain is something which they did not like, but they didn't protest. So that's what we have like our Mishnah. The piling was something that they didn't like, but there was also no protest. Rabbi Yehuda really could be the author of our Mishnah. Okay. The next part of Mishnah said, your kotzer l'shachas. Shachas is that unripened grain, which is often used for animal food. So that the Mishnah said, kotzer l'shachas u'maichel behema. Now, there's different opinions about this. The first opinion our Mishnah said that it says kotzer l'shachas. Our Mishnah said that you can harvest this unripe grain and feed it to your animal. Maichel behema. Yeah, that's the first one. However, Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah said, the first opinion said you can do that until it reaches a third of its ripening stage. Once it gets to a third, so then that's it. You can't do it anymore. Rabbi Shimon said you could even harvest and eat it even once it reached a third. Even once it reached a third. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to talk about that. The first opinion says you can harvest the unripe grain because it's not really considered harvesting because unripe grain. You harvest things that are ripe. So, yeah. So Tanan Hassam, but the Mishnah says in Peya, you're going to have a whole field and you're going to have a number of things that could cause a separation and make it into 2 fields. Once you have 2 fields, now you have 2 corners to leave off. So the question is, what are the things that are considered a separation? So if in between your field, you put a whole, a pathway to get from your friend's house to your house, right in the middle of your whole field. So that might be a separation between two sides of your field. What if you have an area which is a bunch of unripe grain like this, and it's harvested? Is that considered a separation? Because it's not really considered harvesting. Only a field that is meant to be harvested will have the obligation of payah. A field that is not meant to be harvested or doesn't really count as a harvest because it's shachas, it's unripe grain, that's not considered something which is liable for payah, and that will be a separation. So, Tanan Hasam ve'elu mafsikin, the following things divide up your field in terms of your obligation to leave part of it off for the poor people. Ve'elu mafsikin lepayah, so hanachal, simply understood, a nachal is a stream, but some say it's a certain path of like a rocky area.
The one first one was a ravine, then a pond of rainwater.
Yeah, simply understood. Usually as a nachal is a stream, but
okay.
Yeah, Art Scroll calls it a ravine. I think it's probably good. Like it's a dry river.
What's
a ravine?
Like a
stream of water.
A low place.
No water.
No water. Just
no water.
Not necessarily. Water doesn't have to be there. It's
just or it's a low place that water like a ravine, or maybe it's a stream. Either way, that's a nachal. Veha shlulis. Issue in Israel, you have places nachal this, nachal that. It doesn't mean necessarily there's water. It means it's more of a low place.
Okay.
Yeah. So okay. So a ravine, and then you have a shlulis. A shlulis is a place that the rainwater gathers up there. So if on the left side and on the right side you have all the grain you're growing, and in the middle you have an area where the rainwater will gather up, that's also going to be a separation. The derech hayachid, a pathway, just arba amos for one person to go through. The derech harabim, which is 16 amos. I guess you would think if it says derech hayachid, for sure derech harabim. If 4 amos is a separation, for sure 16 amos is a separation. I guess you have to know what the novelty of that is. But ushvil harabim, or not like a derech, like a 16 amos wide thing, but an area where the public goes through. The where the public walks through. Not necessarily a 16 amos official public area, but an area that the public walks through. I remember spending Shabbos in a community, and like the way you got to shul, you always walk through the guy across the street's backyard because it was just a shortcut to get to shul. And like he allowed everyone to do it, he didn't care. So that's like the public is walking through. It's not 16 amos as an official public area. The shvil hayachid, or like a small pathway for a private individual to walk through. Hakavua, the things they have to be kavua, they have to be set. Now, in the rainy season and in the summer and the winter, in the rainy season and in the summer season, it's got to be there. It can't be something for a month you put it up and then it's not like a pool. It's only open 2 months a year. It's got to be open the whole year. So okay, that's that. Yeah, the habor. If you have a bore is a field.
Fallow.
Yeah, a field that's laid fallow. So a bore is usually like an empty pit, but it means here like the field is just fallow. So you have that fallow area in between two fields that are growing grain. That's also a separation. The hanir is a field that's plowed after you planted, right? So you ended up plowing it. The zera acher, or let's say between two areas where you're growing wheat, in the middle you're growing beans. That's also called the separation, and therefore you have to leave off 2 corners for each field of wheat. Okay, now here's what we want. All that was for this, yeah. So the kotzer l'shachas. And let's say you have an area where you harvested this unripe grain called shachas. The kotzer l'shachas mafsik divrei Rabbi Meir. That if you harvest the shachas, so then that will be something which separates. Now Right. Simply understood is that it's not really considered harvesting. Peya, you have to leave off of a field that needs to be harvested. Harvesting unripe grain is not really considered harvesting. Now, if it's not really considered harvesting, then you could harvest it even before they bring the omer. That's not really considered harvesting. So the coats of the shachas mafsik divrei Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir. The chachamim omrim ein mafsik. It's not going to cause a separation, ela im kain charash, unless you plowed it, and then it would be considered a plowed field. But if you didn't plow it, so then it's considered a harvesting. It's like the beginning of your harvesting. That's fine. You're beginning to harvest it now when it's not ripe. And when it finishes getting ripe, you'll harvest the rest. That's fine. Okay, so that's the chachamim. And therefore, the same should be true in terms of harvesting this unripe grain before the omer. So, yeah, so that's our problem. So now, says the Gemara, Amar Rabba bar Rav Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Meir, who says that harvesting this shachas, unripe grain, is a separation because it's not really harvesting. He's in line with Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah, who says that you can harvest the unripe grain even if you're not giving it to your animals. B'shidush Rabbi Shimon Amra, the Amar Yiktzar v'Yochal af mishevi shlish. Even if it grew a third, that's still fine. This unripe grain is you can harvest it even before the omer. So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon are in line. So Alma, what do you see from here? Because Savar called the shachas lav katzirahi, that anything which is l'shachas is not considered real harvesting. Now, Yosef Rabba v'ka'amar lahashmaitza. Rabba said over this teaching that he heard that Rav Meir from Rav Yochanan. He heard that Rav Meir is like Rav Shimon. On that Rav Meir is like Rav Shimon, Eiser of Achabar Huna l'Rava. Rav Huna asked Rava a question based on this. Achla, let's say your field was eaten by a chagav, a grasshopper, or this part of your field, karsamuhu nimalim, or ants really devoured it. Chagav karsamuhu, achla chagav, or karsamuhu nimalim, or shavrasa haruach. A lot of wind came and ruined part of your field. Hakol modim, everyone agrees the following. If it's charish, mafsik. If that area is plowed, then it'll separate between the two fields. But lo charish, eino mafsik. If it's not plowed, then it will not separate. So even though it was attacked by grasshoppers, ants, or the wind, the only way it's still considered a field unless it's plowed over. Then it won't be considered a field. Now the language was hakol mafsik. Hakol modim. Everyone agrees. Whenever you have everyone agrees, who's the one you're including? Somebody you would have thought disagreed. No, here they agree. Who is that somebody? So hakol modim man, Rabbi Meir. Who is the one who agrees? That is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who doesn't usually consider harvesting unripe grain as harvesting. Who holds that harvesting unripe grain is not harvesting, therefore it's a separation, even without plowing. So Rabbi Meir, who says if you're harvesting unripe grain, then that's a separation. Even he agrees, though, by grasshoppers, ants, and wind, it has to be plowed to be considered a separation. Okay, so now what's the problem with what we said earlier? I amris bishlama. If you want to tell me our Mishnah is bishlo hevi shlish, is where a third of the produce has not grown yet, and this brisa the charash that says you have to plow it in lo charash lo b'shehevi shlish. So if you tell me that our Mishnah is when it hasn't grown a third, and therefore you're allowed to harvest it, and the brisa is talking about when it's plowed, it's a separation. When it's not plowed, it's not a separation, but it's talking about that it grew a third of the grain. So then everything is fine, because at the end of the day, If it grew a third, you cannot harvest. And if it didn't grow a third, then you could harvest it. However, so then that's very good. If that would be true, that's very good. If you say that our Mishnah, like Rabbi Shimon says, is even when this crop grew a third, and therefore you could still harvest it before the Omer, if that's the case, then we're in trouble. Why? Ashta umah hasam diktsira, Rabbi Meir lo shmek tzira. Just like how come over there when you're harvesting shachas unripe grain, Rabbi Meir says not called a harvest. So hachalo kol shekain. So there's no novelty in this case that if it's plowed, it's not considered a harvest. So let's just get the opinions clear. So at first we said that Rav Meir is like Rav Shimon because Rav Meir said that if you harvest unripe grain, it's not considered harvesting. So that was in line with Rav Shimon that says you can if it's unripe grain, even if it grew a third, it's irrelevant. You can keep harvesting it. That's fine. That was our original statement. Then we said, based off this Mishnah about ants and about grasshoppers, ants, and the wind, we made an implication that if it's not plowed, then it's not going to separate. And we said that that's also the opinion of Rav Meir. He agrees to that if it's not plowed, it's not considered a separation. So the question's like this, is that if you tell me that which Rav Meir said, you can harvest this unripe grain is when it hasn't reached a third, so then that's great, because this brisa that says if the grasshopper, the ants, or the wind get to it, so the reason why it's not considered a separation unless you plow it is because it grew a third. That's fine. If that would be true, though, that's not like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said even if it grew a third, it's still okay to harvest before the Omer. So according to this, Rabbi Meir would not be in line with Rabbi Shimon. Now, if you don't want to say that, you want to say that Rabbi Meir, who allowed regular harvesting of this unripe grain because it's not considered a separation, so for sure over here, when ants and grasshoppers and wind gets to it, well, that's for sure not called a harvesting. He says even when you harvest unripe grain, it's not called a harvesting. For sure, if ants eat it, it's also not called a harvesting. There's no novelty. So the only way you could explain why this is a novelty, Hakol Modim, everyone agrees, is Rabbi Meir. The only way to pull out a novelty from that and explain what Hakol is referring to, if it's referring to Rabbi Meir, then the only way it makes sense is if you say that the earlier Rav Meir was talking about unripe grain that has not grown a third. But if it would have grown a third, like this case, and therefore, unless it's plowed, it's not considered a separation. So then it makes sense. Hakol Modim makes sense. The problem is it's not in line with Rabbi Shimon. Because basically we took Rav Meir, who said you can harvest unripe grain, and we're limiting him to only where it didn't grow a third. But if it were to grow a third, then you can't do that anymore. But that's not like Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah said, even once it grew a third, you can still harvest it. So that's the question on what we said earlier. Before we said Rabbi Meir is like Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. Here, based off this Hakol Modim, everyone agrees, and we're saying everyone is Rabbi Meir, it doesn't fit. So to that we say, you're right. Problem accepted. Ella. Yeah. So Ella, Rabbi Meir is Bishitas Rabbi Yehuda Amra. You have to say that Rabbi Meir says if it doesn't grow a third, it's not considered harvesting. And when it grows a third, it is considered harvesting, is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said that you're allowed to harvest this shachas before it grew a third. But once it grew a third, you can't do it anymore. So this must be the opinion of Rav Meir. He's in line with Reb Yehuda. Yeah. Rabbi Meir, which is the Beshitas Rabbi Yehuda Amra. The Amar, he says, Emasai bezman sheis chalat shel hevi shlish. Aval in his chalat shel hevi shlish, aser. It's prohibited if it grew a third. Only when it didn't grow a third are you allowed to harvest it before the Omer. On that, the Gemara says, hold on. Amar the Shamas de Rabbi Yehuda lebehema. Rabbi Yehuda only says you're allowed to harvest it because that food is going to an animal. But if that food is going to a person, so mi shamislei, who's ever heard of that? That you want to harvest unripe grain to eventually go to a person? That we never said. All we said was that you're welcome back from the East Coast. No, all we said, he's here. So all we said was that if you harvest before it's grown a third for animal food, that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. But he never said even for a person. And Rabbi Meir sounds like even for a person, harvesting less than a third is not considered harvesting. So says the Gemara, well, if you're going to split up like that, the im kain havalahu tzlata tanai, then there's going to be three opinions if you do that. There's going to be the Tanakama in our Mishnah that says, Rabbi Gleizer, nice to meet you. What's your name? Shimon. So Jody came with the baby. Oh, that'd make it more exciting. We've been the most hated people on an airplane many times. So okay. So if you're going to say this, so then there's going to be three opinions. The Tanakama of our mission, the first opinion. What?
Oh, 71B.
We're going to make a button here. Second we drop off, just press the button. We're going to refine our place. It's going to buzz. So
now I need a buzz.
The buzz is over here.
Finished it. I need another.
We're at 7 to 8 lines from the bottom of 71A.
Okay.
So if you say this difference between less than a third for animal food, less than a third for human food, then you're going to have three opinions. You're going to have the first opinion in our mission that says explicitly that if it goes for animal food, it's permitted. Then you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, no, only when it's less than a third. But less than a third, even for a person, is okay. And then you're going to say Rabbi Shimon holds, even if it grew a third and for a person, it's still going to be okay. So the problem is, every time the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that whenever it says in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda comments after an opinion has been stated, and Rabbi Yehuda says the words Amasai, you know when that opinion was stated in the following case. That is always him agreeing, just explaining, not him arguing. So if you're going to make this separation, then it come out to Rabbi Yehuda, who says Amasai, when is that statement relevant, X, Y, and Z? It's going to be a third opinion. But Rabbi Yehuda, when he says the words Amasai in a Mishnah, is always explaining, not arguing. So, Ella, new answer. He also, when Rabbi Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Meir, he said like this: Rabbi Meir is our third attempt for those following. Rabbi Meir is Beshitas Rabbi Akiva Rabba Amra. Rabbi Meir is going like the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, his Rebbe. This time of year, Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students, and then it says the world was desolate. And then it says he restarted with 5 students. Rabbi Meir was one of those 5. So, Rabbi Meir Beshitas Rabbi Akiva Rabba Amra. That what? Afla Adam Nami Lo Havek Tzira. Rabbi Meir holds that even if you're doing it for a person, harvesting for a person, but since it's shachas, less than a third, since it's shachas, it's less than a third, therefore it's not going to be considered harvesting. Harvesting grain that has not even reached a third of its growth is not considered harvesting, and therefore that's permitted. Okay. Ditnan, as we see in the following Mishnah in Peah, today's Peah day, it's our third time I mentioned Peah today. Hamenamer Sada, you have a spotted field, meaning you have a bunch of patches of empty land. V'shayir bo klochim lachim, and you leave over these like wet stalks that if they would grow all the way, so then you have to take Peah from them. It's like the beginning, these like wet stalks, like the beginning of Yes, let's see. You have a field that's spotted, and you leave over a bunch of these wet leaves, wet stalks. Rabbi Akiva Omer, peya l'kol achad v'achad. You have to take peya from each one of these. These sections. V'chachamim omrim no, me'achad al hakol. Meaning, do you view these spotted empty sections as their own fields, and therefore they can have their own peya requirements, or it's all considered one? It's all one field together, and therefore it's only one peya requirement. The Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, lo chayav Rabbi Akiva ela b'menamer leklayos. This is only when it's spotted with these wet stalks, because these wet stalks at the very beginning of their growth, they haven't. It's like shachas, and it hasn't even grown a third, and therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's not considered harvesting. So once again, the case that you have a bunch of empty spots in the field. 1 second. And where are these wet stalks? Not on the empty patches, the other parts of the field. So since according to Rabbi Akiva, lo chayv Rabbi Akiva ela b'menamer leklayos. He's only going to obligate you when you leave this patched field for klayos. Aval b'menamer lo'otzer lo. But if it's patched, and meaning the reason why you left it empty is because what? Because you want to grow stuff there.
Rabbi Akiva required separate peya. We weren't harvesting patches for toasted kernels, but we weren't harvesting patches to store and age the grain.
He'll need it for the whole field,
which is only done then. The areas do not divide the field. Yeah.
So one sec. So the areas divide the field if you have there these like wet stalks.
If you're looking for clothes, I mean, if you're harvesting for clothes, then you've got to do peya.
Why? But if you're harvesting to store away, and it's one for all. Because like this, because when you have empty patches in the field and you harvest and you have these stalks, if you're planning to grow them all and store them away, then you view the whole field as one. If you view them that you just want them, I guess for whatever, I don't know, for animal food or whatever it is, in their unripe state, then each one, then it's going to divide it up. It's not considered harvesting. Right, but if it's not considered harvesting, so it should be one for the whole field, no?
No, then you're creating different fields.
Oh, correct. Yeah, sorry, good. Just like before. Any part that's not good. Any part that's not harvested divides the fields up. So these is not considered harvesting. That's why divided. Yeah, good. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yehuda says for Rabbi Akiva, that when he's harvesting, things that are not really considered harvesting, just like shachas, just like this grain that has not grown to be a third, so therefore, it's going to divide up the fields. But if you're going to harvest to keep for the future, so then it does not divide the fields up, and therefore you would not have to take peya from each one of these sections. So says the Gemara, and that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Ini, is that true? Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Akiva says, even if you're harvesting to store away for the future, and therefore it should be considered harvesting, it still divides up the fields. Why? So 1 second. So that would be a question on that Rabbi Meir goes like Rabbi Akiva, but according to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion of Rabbi Akiva, it's not going to fit with Rabbi Meir, because even if it's more than a third, like in our shachat's example, even if it's already more ripe, but still, even though it's like that, it'll still divide up the field. It'll still divide the field up if they're wet, these wet stalks, because it's not considered harvesting even after it grew a third. So that's not like what we said. So it says the Gemara, you're right. Rabbi Meir holds like his Rebbe in one area, but not in the other area. Savar, next page. Savar la kibase bechado pagla bechado. Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva in terms of when it didn't grow a third, it's not considered a harvest. But he argues with him. That if it grew a third, then you would have to. Then it's already considered harvesting, and therefore it would not divide up the field. What time is it? 55. Okay, we'll do a little more. So we said in three things you're allowed to harvest. One is these saplings that grow by the tree in your orchard. The things that grow there, you could harvest. And then you had it for a shiva, doing shiva outside. You're allowed to harvest also. You're allowed to cut it down. And then also, if you need room for the shear, for the Shabbos Gadol drasha, you're allowed to also harvest it down. So those are so what's my time? What's the reason? It says it's only harvesting for your own purpose that's prohibited. But for a mitzvah is not prohibited. Now the problem is that these saplings that you're harvesting the saplings. Rashi gave us two reasons why you're allowed to do it. The second one was because you're uprooting kilayim, you're uprooting forbidden mixtures. So that's a mitzvah. So that would fall into this category. But the first one is that it's not fit for the omer. The grain that grows in the orchard is not good grain that's fit for the omer. This reason would not apply to that. You have to get a different reason for that, which means that this reason only applies to 2 out of the 3, not 3 out of the 3. But if it's a second reason of Rashi that it's forbidden mixtures, so then it will apply to all 3.
Forbidden mixture.
Right. The Mishnah said you cannot, the grain that's grown by the orchards. So what was the problem with that? Why is that allowed? Either because it's a mitzvah, you're removing the forbidden mixtures, or because it's grain that's not fit for the omer, and it's only grain that's fit for the omer that you're allowed to, that you're not allowed to cut. Yeah. Okay. Actually, we should stop here. It's one long section.
It's getting on that.
Yeah.